Welcome to Neheb the Eternal Brawl Deck Tech. This is brought to you by Integer Traders and Cape Fear Games. So whether it's digital magic or paper magic, we have you covered. So let's take a look at Neheb the Eternal. This is going to be 3 colorless double red. Neheb has a flick 3 whenever this creature becomes blocked, defending player loses 3 life. Then at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, add red mana to your mana pool for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. Now the cool thing about Neheb is that we're pretty much always going to be able to generate some form of mana during our second main phase. So we swing it with Neheb, our opponent declares a blocker. That's going to be a flick for 3. That's going to be 3 red mana. Let's say our opponent does not declare a blocker. We're going to be able to get him for 4 combat damage. That would be 4 red mana that we get to add to our mana pool on our second main phase. Now, what are we trying to do with Neheb? We're trying to cheat out a lot of those really high converted mana cost spells utilizing the extra red mana that we can generate off Neheb. Now, one of the ways that we can definitely take advantage of that is by giving Neheb Unblockable and Trample. We're running stuff like Rile, Renegade Tactics, and Crash Through. These are all great cards that impact our board state and allow us to draw a card once we've cast it. Take Rile, for example. We're going to deal 1 damage to Neheb. It's going to gain Trample. So let's say that we do force our opponent in a spot to where they do have to chump block on Neheb. By giving it Trample, we're going to end up with that afflict trigger for 3, and then whatever sort of damage tramples through, that's going to be some extra red mana for us. Renegade Tactics is going to make sure that Neheb is unblockable, so let's say that we need to swing it in a Planeswalker or something like that. It's not going to give us the extra mana if we swing it at a Planeswalker, but it's always good to have that option. And then Crash Through, we can actually use Crash Through as a finisher for the deck. Let's say that we built up a big enough board state, we go for something like Insult to make sure that our damage is dealt double, give them all trample, and we can swing with our creatures and let our opponent decide how they want to block from there. But these are all great cards that really kind of manipulate the combat step to really help us make sure we can generate that extra mana during our second main phase. Now, outside of these support cards in here, we are running some good support creatures in here. We're running in a flick package. We have Wildfire Eternal, Manticore Eternal, and Frontline Devastator. Once again, we're just putting our opponent in a spot where either they block or they don't block. We're going to be generating that mana, and that's what matters. The cool thing about Wildfire Eternal is that whenever it attacks and isn't blocked, you may cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand without paying its mana cost, so it actually slots really well into the deck. Most of the time, you're going to see a block on Wildfire Eternal, so we're either going to end up with a flick for 4 mana, or we'll be able to cast a spell off of that, which is really good. Now, outside of the Afflict package, we are running some good support creatures in here. We have stuff like Harsh Mentor. Whenever an opponent activates an ability on an artifact, creature, or land, if it isn't a mana ability, it's going to deal 2 damage to that player. Firebrand Archer, it's going to get some extra damage off of our non-creature spells. And then Charging Tuscadon, which is absolutely beautiful in this deck. If it would deal combat damage to a player, it deals double that damage to that player instead. So let's say we swing in with Charging Tuscadon, there's no blocks, that's going to be 8 damage, that's going to be 8 mana generated off of Neheb, which really allows us to push out some of those high converted mana cost spells. Outside of these 3 creatures, we're also running Angrass Marauders, which is going to double up on the damage that we can deal to our opponent. And then Combat Celebrant is going to allow us to exert it, get that extra combat step to really help us make sure we can push through either an alpha swing to where it's going to really make our opponent's life total get down low, or simply just generate a ton of mana with that extra untap step. A lot of our creatures in here, they're not the best creatures in here, so simply going for the extra untap step of Combat Celebrant, we just want to knock our opponent's life total down low enough to where we can finish it off with burn spells, and Combat Celebrant really make sure that we can get that done. With the different ways that we've covered to generate that extra mana, let's see what some of our finisher spells are. We're running Hazard's Undying Fury, Sunbird's Invocation, and Inferno Jet. With Hazard's Undying Fury, we're going to be able to exile the top 4 cards of our library, cast any number of non-land spells with mana cost 5 or less without paying their mana cost. Now, it does have a lands you control don't untap during your next untap step clause, but typically with Neheb, if we're able to generate a ton of mana, we don't necessarily have to worry about that particular that taxing effect on us. Sunbird's Invocation is going to make sure we get as much value off of the spells that we're casting as possible by revealing the top X cards of our library. And then Inferno Jet, that's going to be 6 damage to target opponent. That may be a lot. We are dealing with a limited standard card pool as far as our damage spells go, but let's say that we get something like Insult down to where we're dealing double damage. That 6 damage is going to be 12 damage to our opponent, which is going to be more than enough for us to kind of really go to town on our opponent's life total. And if we can't get stuff going, at least it does have cycling for 2, which allows us to discard it and then draw an additional card. We're also running Insult to Injury and Combustible Gear Hulk. Insult to Injury is pretty much one of the best cards you can run in this deck. Damage can't be prevented this turn. If a source you control will deal damage, it deals double that damage in turn. Deals double that damage instead. So what we can do is we can go Insult during our first main phase, make sure that all our creatures deal double that damage. It's going to be extra mana during our second main phase. We can even go for Injury out of the graveyard, dealing 4 damage to target creature and then 4 damage to target player. Really, just great card for the deck. We're also running Combustible Gearhulk. It's going to enter the battlefield, target opponent. If they don't have us draw 3 cards, we're going to put the top 3 cards of our library into our graveyard. It's going to deal that damage to that player, equal to the converted mana cost of those cards. As you can tell, we're running a lot of high converted mana costs in here, so we might even be able to get a Combustible Gearhulk win. If not, we're going to end up with a 6/6 first strike creature on the battlefield and drawing 3 cards, refueling our hand to go for another Neheb swing. Outside of the big finishers for the deck, we do have a couple more small finisher cards that kind of allow for either spot removal or, once again, to kind of start targeting our opponent's life total. Lightning Strike, Flame Lash, and Fling. These are all ways that we can deal damage to either our opponent or our opponent's creatures. Now with Fling, Fling's really cool in the deck. As the additional cost to cast it, sacrifice a creature. Fling's going to deal damage equal to its power to target creature or player, and that's going to be great for simply 2 mana. Let's say we have Neheb on the battlefield. We sacrifice Neheb to Fling. We've already cast Insult to Injury. That's going to be 8 damage to our opponent. Hopefully that's going to be more than enough to close it out, especially when we throw in some of our other big converted mana costs. We're also running Repeating Barrage in here and Open Fire. Open Fire is just 3 mana burn spell, but with Repeating Barrage, let's say that we don't have some of our big payoff spells. We can use that 3 damage to target creature or player. Then we can use that extra mana for the raid ability to return it to our hand and make sure that we can keep that barrage of damage to our opponent going. Outside of the burn spells that we're running in here, definitely want to run some ramp in here. Want to make sure we can get Neheb out as quickly as possible to get that mana going. Cultivator's Caravan and Manalith. Now, the Chalice actually works really good in this deck. It enters the battlefield, target opponent loses 1 life, and we gain 1 life. So there may be a turn where we can get that down to kind of cash it in for some extra mana, and we'll be able to tap it for a mana. So basically, we'll be able to get ahead on 1 mana with the Chalice. We're also running Primal Amulet in here. It's going to give it a reduced cost on our instant and sorcery spells, and then whenever we cast it, if there's 3 or 4 more counters on it, you may remove those counters, transform it. It will transform into Primal Wellspring. So add 3 mana to your mana pool, and then we'll be able to copy any sort of instant or sorcery spells cast off this Primal Wellspring, which is might be more than enough to help us kind of close the game out. And we're also running Orza Relic as another way to get some good ramp going. And then late game, we can sacrifice it to draw a card if we need to find that last burn spell to close our opponent's life total out. Now, as far as some of the utility creatures that we're running in here, we've got stuff like Azor's Gateway. That's going to allow us to start filtering through some of our hands. And, we have a lot of clunky cards in here, so having a looting source is really good for the deck. Chandra, Torch of Defiance is going to allow us, once again, to kind of dig deeper into our library, or simply use that +1 ability to add some red mana to our mana pool. And then Tormenting Voice, discard a card, draw 2 cards. You want to make sure we can keep our hand fresh and keep it kind of rotated out. We're also running Direfleet Daredevil and Heart Piercer Manticore. Direfleet's going to allow us to cast stuff out of our opponent's graveyard with that extra mana. And then Heart Piercer Manticore, it's either going to be a beat stick for 4/3, or we can sacrifice it and simply deal that damage up to our opponent, or sacrifice another one of our creatures, acting as a secondary fling for the deck. Now, as far as some of the control cards that we are running in here, we've got only about 3 cards dedicated to control. We have a Braid, Sweltering Suns, and Hour of Devastation. These are all ways to make sure we can keep the board clear for us to swing in with Neheb. And fun fact, with Hour of Devastation, Neheb will survive an Hour of Devastation, 5 damage to each creature in its Planeswalker, clearing the way for you to swing in. That's going to be it for the deck. This is definitely one of those decks that you're definitely going to go all in with Neheb swinging in and trying to generate as much mana as possible. And Neheb is a lot of fun to play in Commander, and I anticipate it to be a lot of fun to play in Brawl too. But that's going to be it for the video. In fact, if you enjoyed it, like and subscribe. Thanks. Bye.